Hey, what's up everybody? This is Blazing Ace Nelson back again, and I figured this time I'd do something a little bit different compared to the usual Sengoku Basara Spotlight episodes I've been doing. Now, a little bit of backstory for you. Looking around YouTube, especially back when the game first came out, or back when the game was first announced, a lot of the pro players and a lot of the bigger YouTube names like Maximilian have been, posting up footage of different matches and different tutorials for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And in the comments section of just about every single video that I've seen focusing on a character or on a particular aspect of the game, there's always that one person that asks the question, will you actually do something as far as like a video that covers the basics for people who haven't really had the chance to get into the game yet but want to? Or someone that's played something completely different like Soul Calibur or Tekken or Dead or Alive or Virtua Fighter but wants to actually get into Marvel but isn't quite sure how to make the transition. And these guys have said, sure. It's like, sure, I have no problem getting down to actually doing that kind of video. But, as it turns out, larger projects come up and it's really no fault of theirs, but there still is a bit of a lack of just, basic tutorials and such. I mean, sometimes, when people ask about the basics of the game because they want to get into it, a lot of the time they're just directed to the forums at shoryuken.com or event hubs, which aren't bad places by any means. I mean, there's a lot of valuable information there. But at the same time, sometimes just actually seeing it in motion really helps someone grasp the concept of what you're trying to teach them. So with that stated, hopefully I'll be able to help some of you grasp the concept of, at the very least, some of the basics, at least for this episode anyway, of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. So on that note, I, your humble intermediate gamer, Blazing Ace Nelson, introduce the Rookie's Field Training Guide to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Round 1, Basics. So let's go ahead and load up training mode real quick so that way we'll have a pretty stable, pretty controlled environment in which for me to actually, go over the basics of Ultimate Marvel 3.
Welcome to the world of Marvel vs. Capcom
Now,
3, where the finest
I know there are going to be some of you in the comments that say, this is all stuff that we've seen or heard before, or, even a baby could do some of this stuff. But the thing is, sometimes when making a transition from one game to another, sometimes even the simple stuff can go out of the window, like basic controls, button layout, certain beginner level technology and beginner level terminology that could really help entry into the game be a little bit less hazardous. So with that stated, I'll just go ahead and pick a few random characters. Well, not necessarily random, but hopefully a few characters that will aptly help me illustrate some of my points as far as getting down to just the basics of the game, how it controls, the button layout, and other such entry-level formalities. So let's see, a good all-around basic team. Let's go with Ryu, ye old Street Fighter poster boy. Now let's see, a good big character. Let's go with my personal favorite, Mr. Mayor, Mike Hagar. And now for a good speed character. I think I'll go with a Marvel speed character this time and bring in 2, 3... Das Spider-Man in the black and red. Just what I was hoping for. Now let's go ahead and take it to random and choose a team. I think this might actually work out as well. Excuse me. Yes, me yawning in the midst of these is going to probably be a regular occurrence since I usually have time to do these videos right after I get off work. But anyway, let's get down to the meat and potatoes of it. Now, for those of you actually... I think I'll go ahead and explain this for the benefit of those that haven't really gotten into fighting games much recently, which there are still a few out there who haven't. Now, as far as basic movement goes, I mean, you've got your standard stuff. You know, backward and forward movement. Now, in order to do that, you're going to want to move either left or right on the joystick directional pad or left analog stick, whichever one you're using at the time. Now, since you're fighting on a 2D plane, since you're basically fighting on a 2D plane, even though everything is animated and rendered in 3D, your movement is basically going to be from the perspective of towards your opponent or away from your opponent. Down is, of course, to duck, which basically gives you the option for utilizing low-level attacks, but has the drawback of being very vulnerable to jumping or overhead attacks, which I'll explain a little bit later. Speaking of jumping, up. Real simple. Up and away from your opponent does a backward jump or backflip. Up and forward does a forward jump or flip. Now, just as with, most command notations that you see written down or in strategy guides, everything's going to assume that you're on the one player's side. So you're going to be on the left-hand side of the screen, facing right. Again, a lot of people would think this is pretty standard stuff, but I also have to make this point once again, and it's a point that I really have to hammer home. Sometimes the transition from one game to another just throws all the basics that you would learn in another completely out the window. Now, let's go ahead and switch this, let's see, yeah, change the dummy options to CPU. Now, considering that this is a game where you are going to be going at your opponent and your opponent is going to be coming at you practically head on, or at least all of their, they're going to be attacking you from start to finish, you're going to want to learn how to block. To block, there isn't a particular button for it like, say, in Mortal Kombat. And there is no neutral blocking like in Tekken, or there isn't a guard button like in Soul Calibur. So pretty much in order to facilitate your defense, you want to hold away from your opponent. Hold back to block. Yes, there is a site called Hold Back to Block, which does some pretty awesome video work now that I think about it. I'll wind up putting a link to them in the description below as well. But, that was just a little aside. What we're here for, though, is just all the basics. All the good stuff to help you get started. Oh, no. No. Go away. Shoot. And what I just demonstrated for you right there is dashing. Another one of the basics of mobility as far as playing this game. To dash, there are two ways of going about it. You can either tap forward or back twice in rapid succession, or you can press 2 or all 3 of the attack buttons. Default controls have this mapped as R2 on the PS3, or the right trigger on the Xbox 360. One button dash. There you go. Now, as far as jumping goes, there's also another type of jump which you should be very familiar with, and that's the super jump. So if you hit down, then up, once again in rapid succession, like so, you'll get a much higher jump for your character, thus giving you more hang time, more opportunity to pull off attacks in the air, and in some instances, a good way to actually avoid most incoming attacks, if you're careful. Now do remember, as far as blocking goes, as far as actual defense goes, you can do a crouching guard as well by holding down and away from your opponent, or you can block most things mid-air by holding up and away from your opponent. That right there should do it for the basics as far as movement and defense. Now let's go for the basic basic control setup. Now, it's already been established in the original Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and also in the previous Capcom crossover game, Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, that instead of the traditional 6-button Street Fighter layout, or even the 4-button layout of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, where you would have a light and heavy version of your punches and kicks, it's all been wrapped up into one basic set of commands where you just have a light attack, a medium attack, and a heavy attack. Light attacks are generally done by pressing square, in which case I believe is the X button on the Xbox 360 if I remember right. And the light attack button is usually very fast. There's the standing and of course the low attack. Now for characters, well, for most characters, even someone like Ryu or let's say someone a little speedier, like Spider-Man, the light attack button is basically going to be their fastest normal attack. It's good for keeping your distance, or at least keeping the opponent away from you at a certain distance. It's also really good for annoying your opponent too. But don't get caught just throwing those out there carelessly. Now, mapped to triangle by default is the medium attack button, or let's see, if light was X, then medium would be Y on the Xbox 360. Medium attack's a little slower, does a little bit more. Medium attack's a little slower, does a little bit more damage if it connects. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in a taller character. There we go, bam. Does a little bit more damage. And, you know, it's a good intermediate sort of attack. Now, mapped to the B button on the Xbox 360 or circle on the PS3 is the hard attack, or the heavy attack. Heavy attacks are slower, but again, do more damage per hit. And also, they leave your opponent in a stagger or stun animation for a lot longer compared to the other two. Heavy attacks are usually really good for opening up for special attacks. Now let's go ahead and move into the low attacks. I've already shown you the low light attack. Low medium, again, usually a little bit slower than the light attack, but still does pretty decent damage, and for some characters actually has special properties if you use it. Like, Spider-Man's low-medium attack can actually be used in certain situations to protect him against any enemies that are trying to come in airborne. The low-heavy attack with most characters is generally a knockdown, or, you know, some sort of sweep that actually knocks your opponent off your feet, even if for a split second. The way the controls are set up, well, the way the combat system is set up in this, every attack, no matter how much delay there is behind it, can usually be stopped mid-animation or cancelled out of to go into something else. Speaking of going into something else, let's go back to mobility for just a second. there's a few things I forgot to mention. For starters, jumping. Now, some of the smaller characters, some of the smaller high-speed characters, actually have more options while they're in the air, as far as, like, say, having a second jump, or, in Spider-Man's case, actually being able to use the dash mid-air to swing across the screen and get you places even faster. I guess you could say that's one of the more technical aspects of certain speed characters. But again, I mean, if you can dash on the ground, chances are that there are some of the high-speed characters that can dash in the air. And again, if you mix, let's say, air dashes, like with Spider-Man, with super jumps, or even just with normal jumps, you can go for some interesting setups as far as just, again, getting your character from point A to point B for your next move. And now that we've covered movement in the air, let's go back to attacking in the air as well. Now, if you're going to do a jumping attack, jumping light for example, or jumping medium, or jumping heavy, all of which pretty much have the same properties as far as, have the same general properties of their type as far as speed, stun, and usage, basically. If you're going to go for attacking in the air, keep in mind that if you're facing off against an opponent that's trying to use a low guard, you'll win more often than not. But there are also moves that every character has that can counter air attacks, so you're going to want to be careful with that. Now, as far as other default commands, the X button on the PS3 or the B button on the Xbox 360 is what's called the special button, or in this instance, the launcher. Why? Pretty self-explanatory. Launcher attacks will launch your opponent into the air. Now, if you hit the launcher button while you're in midair, you do an even heavier attack, which does a slightly greater amount of stunning compared to heavy attacks. And if your opponent is also in the air with you, you will very likely knock them back down to the ground. Now for the basics of chaining and for the basics of combos. The building blocks of learning how to play Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 relies on being able to chain attacks together, one right after the next. Again, this is a fast-paced game, so you've got to be relatively fast on the buttons. Some characters can chain together light attacks just by, tapping the same button really fast, and you get that rapid, that sort of rapid movement, rapid attack, and you actually build up combos from there. But probably the basics of the basics is light, then medium, then heavy, and in most cases, the launcher. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do the same on the ground, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can also do so on the air. 1, 2, you get the idea. If a character's tall enough, you can chain together all 4 attacks in the air while they're still on the ground. Excuse me. Now, you can actually go from a ground chain combo to an air chain combo by simply going light, medium, heavy, and as soon as you hit them with the launcher, press up or hold the launcher button to have your character follow the opponent into the air to continue the combo from there. And once in the air, light, medium, heavy, or light, medium, heavy, special. 2, 3, 4. And as I said, hitting the special button in the air while you're comboing your opponent will send them right back down to the ground in most cases. So your basic combo would look something like this. Now, an 8-hit combo going from the ground to the air. Again, in some aspects it may seem difficult, but it just takes a little bit of time to actually, to get the button presses down, to really get your thumb to memorize where the buttons are on the pad, and to pretty much have that committed to muscle memory. But if you take the time, even if it's just like 5 or 10 minutes in the practice mode with your favorite character, then you should be fine, at least at the start. Let me go ahead and switch back to Ryu real fast. By the way, speaking of switching, this will actually bring to mind another one of the important basics of Ultimate Marvel 3, the assist. Now, on the PS3 controller, that'd be mapped to either L1 and R1, or on the Xbox 360, it'll be mapped to the left and right bumpers. If you notice, at the top of the screen where the life bars are, you'll see A1 and A2 next to your 2 reserve characters. A1, Assist 1, is mapped to L1. A2, or Assist 2, is mapped to R1. So let's say I want to call out Hagar. Tap the button, Hagar comes out, does his thing, and leaves. Say I want to call out Ryu while Spider-Man is still in. Tap the button, Ryu does his thing and leaves. Now, if you want to actually switch to that character and have them active on the screen, simply hold down the button corresponding to their assist. So if I want to bring back in Ryu, all I have to do is hold down R1. And Ryu comes in with a flying kick, generally ready to go. Also, if I want to call in Hagar, hold down the assist button for him, and then I can also switch back to Ryu, basically doing the same thing. Now, one thing to keep an eye out for if you're actually playing against someone, or heck, even if you're playing against the CPU, is if you call out an assist, and let's say the computer decides to actually attack, your assist character will take twice the amount of damage that they normally would if they are caught mid-assist by an attack. I'll go over that in greater detail in a later episode, but that's just one of those things that you really hate to have happen to you in the middle of a match. Just like with any of your attacks, especially the fast light attacks, don't just throw this stuff out there without a care in the world, because it will get your characters hurt and it will cost you the match if you're not careful. And in hindsight, you'll look back on it and you'll go, maybe I should have let him stay on the sidelines. I'm just saying, a little friendly advice from someone who's had that happen to him quite a bit. Now, excuse me. Another of the basics that you'll want to get yourself familiarized with is the throws. Now, for those of you who've played other fighting games before, especially other Capcom and SNK fighting games, throws are pretty basic. Hold towards your opponent, and use the heavy attack. Or for a backward throw, while you're in close, hold away from your opponent, and use the heavy attack. Like so. Now, if you don't want to move from one side of the screen to the other, but you want your opponent in a particular position, throws tend to be a pretty good way to do that without you having to expend the effort to get your character moving around themselves. Majority of the time, throws are also available mid-air as well. Like so. Front and back and front throws. Well, let's see. There's movement. Basic offense, basic defense, throws. Oh yes, that's right. Now some characters also have basic attacks which are done by holding a particular direction on the control pad and using one of the normal attacks. Like say for example with Ryu. He has a move where if you hold forward and hit medium attack, he does a downward angled punch, which on standing opponents or even most crouching opponents does 2 hits. But beware that this move will actually hit crouching opponents and go through their defense. That is basically what's called an overhead. Now that's a little bit of, intermediate beginner offense for you. Now some intermediate beginner defense, let me go ahead and switch this back to CPU, is the advancing guard or the push block. Now, if you hit the button for the dash for all 3 attack buttons while you're in the middle of blocking something, then you'll do what's known technically as an advancing guard or a push block. The push block is good for actually creating distance between you and your attacker so that you have a little bit of leeway, and it's also good for minimizing damage if you are, say, taking the brunt of a multi-hit super attack or just a multi-hit special attack, or even someone trying to chain together normal combos while they're on the ground. You can do standing, low advancing guards, and even advancing guard while you're in the air, as I'll hopefully be able to demonstrate once I unpause this thing. Okay, that was a normal block. Dang it. That was not supposed to happen. That's me getting my butt whooped. Notice, advancing guard. Pushes the enemy back, does no damage to them, but creates opportunities for me. And as you just saw, the computer itself also did so as well. So again, anything you can do, they can do. Anything you have access to, they do as well. And as is the case with this particular game, considering how generally unique all the characters' movesets are, they may have access to something different that you'll need to learn how to counter. But again, that's a bit of strategy that's going to come up on a later episode, and especially once we get into the more character-specific episodes. Anyway, looks like I'm coming up on the half-hour mark, so I'm going to go ahead and bring this episode to a close. Now, if there's anything I forgot, if there's anything that I might have actually forgotten, or if there's anything that you guys want to add to the discussion in the comments, please leave me some feedback. Let me know, because I'm doing this pretty much to help expand not just the knowledge base of the fighting game community as a whole, but maybe even bring more players in. The more blood we have in the pool, the greater the competition, the greater the gaming. So until next time, until the next episode of the Rookie Field Training Guide for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, I'm Blazing Ace Nelson, and as always, shoutouts to my new subs, shoutouts to my friends, both old and new. See you next time. Stay gaming. Peace.